Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. And also, the other thing I like to say is I'm brown on the outside, red, white, and blue on the inside. And just one quick point to what Brother Mike talked about, the textbooks. I was in Chicago recently. My niece, who just finished high school, I was going through her social studies and civics textbooks just to see what they're teaching her. In her social studies textbooks, there were 4 chapters concerned either with homosexuality, transgender, LGBT rights, affirmative action. There was one mention of September 11, and even that had no mention of who did it, what their religious motivation was, nothing. So that's how bad it is. It's terrible, especially in the big cities. They're trying to do that even here in small towns all across Red America, the heartland. So I just wanted to mention that. And before I get to the speaker, I just wanted to mention, as a point of personal privilege, I grew up in India. Growing up, my idea of America was this beautiful land with amazing, friendly people, helpful people, loving people, where law and order meant something. People actually followed laws, unlike every other place that I'd seen outside of America. And if someone had told me that in 2018 you'd see bands of masked thugs running around destroying things and elected representatives openly calling for foreign citizens here in this country illegally to vote, I would have called anyone crazy. But folks, that's exactly what's happening. And the other thing, from my perspective, if any of you all have heard me before, I talk a lot about Islam and with all the entire history of Islam. For me, growing up in India, seeing no-go zones was pretty common. But when I see no-go zones in Chicago, believe me, I've seen them. That's when I know that we're on the precipice here. And tonight's fantastic speaker will address all of these issues, and that's his expertise, is he can bridge all of those topics so beautifully. So, without further ado, our presentation tonight addresses the concern of how a nation born for religious freedom and tolerance has backfired to no longer tolerating the religion of the founders. Dr. William Federer will be sharing his thoughts about this, and you'll have an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask any questions that y'all will definitely have. Dr. Federer is not only known for his writings as an American historian, he's also a former U.S. congressional candidate, as well as a nationally known speaker. Best-selling author, and his fantastic books and DVDs are set up right there at the entrance if y'all would like to get an autographed copy. They're all great. And he's also, Dr. Federer, he's written more than 20 books, and he's also president of AmeriSearch Incorporated, a publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage, and it is so noble. And just quickly, it just tears me apart for someone who came into this country when I see that heritage being torn apart. Many, or some of you might be familiar with Dr. Federer's American Minute radio show, which is actually broadcast on 9:30 a.m. The Answer here in San Antonio as well. Also, his Faith in History TV program airs across America on the TCT network and via DirecTV. If y'all get a chance, check it out. So, how did America go from pilgrims seeking freedom to express their Judeo-Christian beliefs to today's discrimination against those very beliefs? Ladies and gentlemen, it's a distinct pleasure to introduce a noted historian, best-selling author, and true American patriot, Dr. William Federer.
Well, thank you, Roger, and he is fascinating. I'd be thrilled to spend the whole night just listening to Roger. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Steve Branson, for having me here and for supporting Roy White, and thank you, Kat, and Brad and all the rest of the tremendous crew. It's a real honor for me to be here. I wanted to mention a few of my books before I get started. One is called Change to Chains. I thought I would research every civilization that's ever existed on the planet to find out what the most common form of government is. And so I went back to the beginning of the invention of writing. Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley. And writing was invented around 3300 BC. And we're around 2000 AD, so 2000 plus three or 4,000, it's around 5,000 or 6,000 years of records, which is not that long. 6,000 years is just 60 people living 100 years each back to back. How many of you have met someone who's lived 100 years or close to it? Maybe a grandmother? We're talking 60 grandmothers, and you're all the way back to the beginning of recorded human history. It's not that long ago. And so I thought, well, what's the most common form of government? Well, if we look at the records, there's Nimrod, Tower of Babel, 2,000 years of Egyptian pharaohs, Sennacherib of Assyria, Cyrus of Persia, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, until the Hun. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger. So the most common form of government is a king. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger, because with military advancements, you can kill more people, right? Bronze, stronger than stone, but iron stronger than bronze. But it all goes back to that fallen, selfish human nature of Cain killing Abel. It's just magnified through technology. And as the centuries go on, the King of England had the biggest empire the planet Earth had ever seen. And America's founders decided to flip it and make the people the king. So it's a polarity change in world government. Instead of top-down, ruled by kings and dictators and sultans and Führers and so forth, it's a bottom-up form of government ruled by the people. Right? So that's what we have in America. So the book Change to Chains covers this topic, as well as a DVD called Who is the King in America? And it's you. So I bring out, a democracy is where the people are king ruling directly. So a democracy only ever works. Now the word democracy has two meanings. One is the general thought of people having a say in their government, but as far as an actual functioning government, it only worked on a small scale. Right? Maybe like a city-state, like Athens. Why? Because a pure democracy, everybody has to be there every day to talk politics. And if you don't show up for a couple of days, you don't know what's going on, you're called an idiotus. An idiot. A republic is where you take care of your family and your farm, and you have someone in your place that goes to the market every day and talks politics. They are your representative. So Rome had a republic, and in America we have a republic. So the people are king, ruling through representatives. So we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. We're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves. So when somebody protests the flag, what they're saying is, I don't want to be the king anymore. I protest this system where I participate in ruling. It's like, okay, somebody else will dictate what's going to happen with your life. Anyway, so who is the king in America? Fascinating part of this is, where did the founders get the idea? Little ancient Greece, ancient Rome, but ultimately ancient Israel. First 400 years when Israel came out of Egypt and they came into the promised land, around 1400 BC. That's the first instance of a nation with millions of people and no king. And it worked for 400 years as long as the priests taught the law. Well, that's what this is about. And then and by the way, my talk tonight is also this DVD. And then there's some other DVDs on the table. There's 3 different ones. This is volume 3, volume 2, where there are 10 stories on each one. They're miracles in American history. Stories in the past where there's a crisis, they pray, and things turn around. Revolution, War of 1812, Civil War, Barbary Pirate War, rivers rising, fogs and allowing Washington to escape. Just fascinating. Well, with that, I'm going to get into my talk tonight, and we're going to talk about religion and separation of church and state, and And you'll end up knowing more than you'll ever thought you would have known. And so I think you'll find it fascinating. So if we just jump into history, we're going to see the Reformation starts in 1517, Martin Luther. And he has to stand trial before King Charles V of Spain, and he's whisked away and hidden in a castle where he translates the Bible into German. Meanwhile, the Muslims surround Vienna, Austria in 1529. 100,000 Muslims led by Suleiman the Magnificent. And so he controls this entire huge area that all used to be Christian. A little recap. So Muhammad dies in 632 AD. Within just a few years, the Muslims conquer Yemen, which used to be a Jewish kingdom. Muslims conquer Jerusalem, which had been a Byzantine Christian city since Constantine. Muslims conquer Syria, which was completely Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. The name Christian was first used in Syria until Caliph Umar conquered it. Egypt was completely Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by Mark, who wrote the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, until Amir ibn al-As conquers it. And there used to be 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa. Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, Libya, it was all Christian for centuries. St. Augustine of Hippo was from Carthage, today that's Tunisia. And then in the year 711, 80,000 Muslims invade Spain. And the Muslims are on horseback Arabian horses with stirrups and scimitar swords. Europeans are still fighting on foot with heavy metal swords. In 10 years, the Muslims conquer all of Spain, carry away over 1 million into slavery. There were whole Catholic orders through the Middle Ages called the Trinitarians. The head of the order was called the ransomer, and they would collect alms and donations at church services, and then go and ransom your friend back that was captured and enslaved by the Muslims. So finally, the Muslims cross the Pyrenees Mountains from Spain into France. And they're just outside of Paris when they're stopped by Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne. And so Islam, Muhammad dies in 632 AD, and they're stopped in 732 AD, just outside of Paris. They go from Arabia to Paris in a 100-year military campaign. And since this is the first century of Islam, there are some that look to that as their example, the way Christians look to the first century of Christianity as our example. The difference is Jesus and the apostles never led armies. Muhammad and the rightly guided caliphs led armies. And so the Turks convert to Islam, they conquer all of that, and then they conquer what is today Turkey. Back then it was the Byzantine Empire. All 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were all wiped out by the Muslim Turks. All the letters in the New Testament to Ephesus and Colossae and Galatia and Philippi and Corinth, all those cities were wiped out by the Muslim Ottoman Turks. The Greek Christians begged the Catholic West for help. The West sends help for a couple centuries called the Crusades. When they end, the Muslims surround Vienna, Austria. So now we're back to Martin Luther. So Martin Luther says the Turk is the flesh of Antichrist, which slaughters bodily by the sword. Martin Luther says the fight against the Turks must begin with repentance. We must reform our lives or we shall fight in vain. Our sins and ingratitude have earned God's wrath, so he justly gives us into the hands of the devil and the Turk. What's he talking about? Deuteronomy 28. The blessings and the cursings chapter. These are the blessings if a nation hearkens to the voice of the Lord. They'll be the head and not beneath, the head and not the tail, above and not beneath. They'll lend to many nations, they'll not have to borrow. And then it goes on, and these are the curses if a nation does not hearken to the voice of the Lord. They will be beneath. And it says the stranger will come in amongst them and rise up above them, and they will be the head, and you will be the tail. And they will be above and you'll be beneath, and they'll lend to you and you'll have to borrow. So how did God judge ancient Israel? He let the stranger come in, the Amalekite, Hittite, Moabite, termite, mosquitoite, parasite, Millerite, I don't know all the ites, right? And they came in and they rose up above and they oppressed the children of Israel. Sort of like a dead fish will attract microbes that will eat it up. A dead bird attracts little ants. Dead things attract stuff that eats them up and decomposes them and kills them. Right? And so when a nation is in sin and it's morally dying, it attracts judgment. And so this is what Martin Luther is talking about. It says we have to repent. We have to have a polarity change. Change the magnetic substance so it'll repel the destroyers and the wasters by our repentance. So Martin Luther starts the Reformation, and Western Europe, as well as the New World, is controlled by the King of Spain. He is called the Holy Roman Emperor. He controls Spain, Portugal by marriage, all of Italy, all Austria, the Spanish Netherlands, all the New World. He's taken the gold from the New World to fit out his navy to keep the Muslims from taking over Europe. And the Philippines are named after his son, King Philip of Spain. It's the biggest empire in the world. The sun never set on the Spanish Empire. And Charles V saw it as his responsibility to save Christendom from Islam. And so the two most powerful kings on planet Earth are the Muslim Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, and the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V of Spain. Now, Charles V, from his point of view, he is facing a double dilemma. Protestant Reformation on one side, Muslim invasion on the other side. Right, I got problems on the inside with this Reformation. I got problems on the outside with the Muslims surrounding Vienna. So Charles V does something unprecedented that even affects us today. What is it? It's called the Peace of Augsburg of 1555. Now, I took German in college, and my little brother took German too. He says that one of his favorite words in German is 1555. 1555. Say that again. 1555. Anyway, 1555. So this Peace of Augsburg is the first treaty ever to legally recognize Protestants in a treaty. Right? So this is when did the Reformation start? 1517. And so he's spending a couple of decades trying to stop the Reformation. He can't. Muslim invasion is picking up and getting serious. He goes, okay, I'll do a deal with the Protestants. Let's just have a united front against the Muslims who are invading Europe. And so in this Peace of Augsburg is a little Latin phrase that had enormous repercussions. What was the phrase? Cuius regio ius religio, which means, whose is the reign, his is the religion. In other words, look, Protestant prince, believe whatever you want in your kingdom. Let's just work together against these Muslims who are invading Europe because they sort of want to kill us all. And so it worked. It stopped the invasion, but it started a domino effect. And so in the next century, different kings decided to believe different things. And so you had Catholics and Lutherans and Calvinists and Anglicans and Bohemian, Moravian, Brethren, Hussites, Anabaptists, Eastern Orthodox. And if you didn't believe the way your king did, it was considered treason. And so you had to flee. And so suddenly Europe is thrown into this mass migration of people shifting from one country to another, religious wars, simply for conscience sake. So again, recapping, prior to the Muslim invasion, all of Western Europe was Catholic. Muslim invasion gets really, really serious, and this is when Charles V makes this Peace of Augsburg deal to say, look, let's unite, and then different kings in the next century believe different things, and you got Europe into this mass migration. And so, Northern Germany and Sweden are Lutheran, Switzerland Calvinist, Scotland Presbyterian, Holland Dutch Reformed, Greece is Greek Orthodox, Spain, Portugal, France, Austria, Italy, Poland, Ireland remain Catholic, and England Anglican. So let's look at this. There's one Christian denomination per country, but the king believed, the kingdom had to believe, and if not, you're persecuted. Let's look at England. Now, England had a Catholic king named Henry VIII. He's married to the daughter of the King of Spain, Catherine of Aragon. And after 18 years, Catherine doesn't have a son. A daughter married, but not a son, so Henry decides to divorce her. The Pope won't recognize the divorce because she is, after all, the daughter of the most powerful guy in the world, King of Spain, and the King of Spain's army had invaded Rome and imprisoned the Pope for 6 months. So the Pope's not in any hurry to get on the wrong side of the King of Spain, so he tells Henry VIII, no, not going to recognize the divorce. Henry says, you know what, I'm far enough away from Spain and Italy, I'm just going to declare myself my own Pope. So he starts the Church of England. He puts himself on as the head, and he goes on to have 6 wives. And their fates were divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. So Henry VIII was not a really nice guy to be married to. He ended up being around 400 pounds. He thought that meat was the right food and vegetables were sissy food. And you know how guys show off their biceps? Back then, guys would show off their calves, their lower leg. and so they would wear these tight stockings, but they didn't have elastic, and so they tie it, and here he is, 400 pounds, and his circulation, he gets gout, these open sores in his leg, and he needs to have his leg amputated, but none of the doctors are going to tell him to get his leg cut off. And so, you tell him. I'm not going to tell him. No, you tell him. So he dies of gout. Anyway, before he dies, his advisors suggest to Henry, if you're really serious about breaking from Rome, you need to stop using the Latin Bible. You need to use an English Bible. The German princes have Martin Luther's German Bible that helped them to break away from Rome. You need an English Bible. Well, it just so happens Henry VIII had William Tyndale burnt at the stake a couple of years earlier. Why? Because he translated the Bible into English. But now Henry sees a political reason to have an English Bible. And it's interesting, William Tyndale's last words were, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." So William Tyndale translates the Bible into English. The king doesn't like it, burns it with a stake, but now the king decides he wants to divorce, and his advisors say, you need an English Bible. He says, okay, get me one. They basically take William Tyndale's work, tweak it a little bit, and they call it the Great Bible. And you can see the engraving at the top. It has Henry sitting on his throne, handing the Bible in English to the bishops and to the noblemen, and they're saying all kinds of great things about him. Oh, you're wonderful, you're just the best. And so he decides that he wants 11,000 copies of this thing, and one put in every single church in England. It was very valuable. They chained it to the pulpit, so it's called the Chained Bible, but people got to read it. For the first time, English-speaking people, and the mass of them, not just the scholars, but the common people, could read the scriptures in their own language. So, amen. Henry dusts it. I'll give you a little idea of the mindset of these kings. Here's King James. He says, kings are God's lieutenants upon earth, sit upon God's throne. The king is the overlord of the whole land, master over every person, having power over the life and death of everyone. So they believed in the divine right of kings, that the creator gives all the power of the king, and he dispenses it to the people. So the kings didn't believe all men are created equal. They believed they were created a little extra special. The kings didn't believe that the creator gives rights to each person. No, the creator gives all the rights to the king, and he's God's lieutenant. He gives it to whoever he feels like it. So, we got Henry VIII. He's the king. He has the Bible translated into English, and he dusts his hands. He goes, that's it. We broke from Rome. We got our English Bible. We're all set. But something unexpected happened. People began to read it and began to compare what's in this Bible to this king divorcing and beheading his wives and claiming to be the head of Christ's church. And so the attitude was, yes, you can read the Bible in your own language, but no, you can't believe whatever you want. You gotta believe what I tell you to believe. I'm the king. And so he passes the Act of Uniformity. So if you have 5 people meeting in your home and you are talking religion without approval of the government, you are all criminals. They'll bust into your house and arrest everybody. They passed the 5 Mile Act. If you are caught preaching within 5 miles of a town without approval of the government, you are a criminal. And they'll arrest you and drag you before the Star Chamber. And so here you have in England, you have the king is the head of the Anglican Church, and there's the Archbishop of Canterbury and the deaneries and vicars and rectors and curates, but he's the head. And now there is the Puritans wanting to purify the Anglican Church, but then there's a bunch of these other Protestants, the Reformers, and they put together a Geneva Bible. That's the one that William Shakespeare used and the Pilgrims brought to America. And so as the Muslims had invaded Greece, the Greek scholars fled to Europe. They brought their Greek New Testaments. And so these reformers are looking at Greek word in their lives, and they're noticing some fine-tuning to the meanings of some words. And one of the words is ecclesia. So in Matthew 16, Jesus says, upon this rock I'll build my church. That word church in Greek is ecclesia. Another verse, In Matthew 18, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church, ecclesia. If he refuses to listen even to the church, ecclesia, let him be as a Gentile. Ecclesia. Now, William Tyndale, when he translated his Bible, did you know that the word church does not appear once? The word ecclesia is translated assembly or congregation. And ecclesia, ek means out of, ecclesia means a calling. It was a Greek word when they would do their democracy, and everybody would be called out of their homes into the public square to deliberate and debate what's going to happen in Athens. And so the word ecclesia is the word Jesus chose to say, upon this rock I'll build my ecclesia. It's a called out assembly. You're called out of the world, you're called together, and it's the people. And this is the term used for the ancient Israelites. So when they were called out of Egypt, they're called out, but it's an assembly of the people. And you'll see that word assembly, and they all get together, and each town chooses their own leaders of their different towns and their own villages. And so King James he did not like the Geneva Bible with this word ecclesia translated assembly or congregation. He wanted the word ecclesia translated church. Why? Because he wanted to be the head of the church. And how can you be the head of something that's a bottom-up form of government where it's the people that are called out of their homes and they're deliberating and they're deciding what's going to happen? And so it's the body of Christ. Every single part of the body has a purpose and they all come together. Now, the King James Bible is a tremendous translation, and it is the world's best-selling book. In other words, if you were to list the New York Times best-selling book, if they'd include the King James Bible, would be all 10 of them every single week. I mean, billions of copies. Why? Because it's not a copyright. Anybody can print it. And it's a great translation. And you can read the different stories of how they get all these different groups, and they check each other's translations. But he did give a little instruction, and it was regarding the word ecclesia. So, you have the king as the head of the Anglican Church. You have these Puritans wanting to purify the Anglican Church. And then you have these separatist reformers that say, no, we want to have a congregational form, a bottom-up form of government. And they're separatists, and they are persecuted, and they flee. Now, if you're in England, and you don't believe the way the king tells you to believe, and you're caught, you're arrested, and you're brought before the Star Chamber, because the room had stars on the ceiling. And they would twist your arm and cut off your ear and cut your nose in half and brand you on the face as a heretic with the letters SL for seditious libel. And so it was a serious thing. They'd put you in the pillory in the middle of town and even burn you at the stake. So it was a serious thing to not believe the way the king says. Wherever there's a king, he wants to insert himself between you and God. Remember the king of Babylon? When I blow my trumpets, you bow to my statue. I don't care if you have a warm feeling in your heart or if you even understand it. You're just going to do it. You know, the king of England burning people to sin. And so kings want to be between you and God, but God's a jealous God. He wants to have a personal relationship with each person. And so what happened was, in England, you had separatists, and some of those were the founders of the Baptist faith. One of them was Thomas Helwise. And he dies in the Newgate prison. He's a dissenter. And while he's there, he writes lots of things, but this is one of the things that he writes. The king is a mortal man and not God. Therefore he hath no power over the mortal soul of his subjects to make laws and ordinances for them, to set spiritual lords over them. If the king's people obey all humane laws made by the king, our Lord the king can require no more. For men's religion to God is betwixt God and themselves. The king shall not answer for it, neither may the king be a judge between God and man. You can see how the king didn't like this stuff. He wanted to dictate to people what they're supposed to believe. Now, one of the Baptist founders in America was John Leland, and he writes The Rights of Conscience Inalienable, 1791. He's a friend of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. John Leland says, every man must give account of himself to God, and therefore every man ought to be at liberty to serve God in a way that he can best reconcile to his conscience. If government can answer for individuals at the day of judgment, let men be controlled by it in religious matters. Otherwise, let men be free. In other words, if the king can stand there on the day of judgment and answer for your conscience, fine, believe whatever the king tells you to believe. But if the king is not going to be there on the day of judgment, you are accountable to God for your own conscience. And so Jefferson is writing to who? To the Danbury Baptists. And what does he say in his letter? Gentlemen, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God. I'll come back to that, but let's jump back into the history story. So we've got King Henry VIII is the King of England. He has the Bible printed in English. You have him as the head of the Anglican Church, and then the Puritans wanting to purify the Anglican Church, and the Pilgrim separatists fleeing the Anglican Church. Well, meanwhile, the Muslims are still conquering, not just surrounding Vienna, now they're conquering the Mediterranean. And the Battle of Lepanto takes place in 1571. It's the largest battle ever on the Mediterranean. There's 230 Muslim ships powered by 15,000 Christian slaves under the deck, like Ben-Hur. And there's 200 of the Holy League. And the Europeans didn't like each other. And so the only way they would fight is if King Charles V's son led them. He's only 24 years old, Don John of Austria. But he had to, but he's a courageous fighter. He's been fighting ever since he's a teenager. He's really courageous. And so the battle's coming to a head, 1571. The wind is against the Holy League. The Europeans, the Spaniards and Austrians and Venetians and Genoans, they're just sitting ducks in the water. And the Muslims have the wind at their back, and they're just barreling in. So the admirals go to Don John and say, you know what, it's not looking good. We can always fight another day. And he says, no, we're here to fight. And he gets them on deck and they pray. While they're praying, the wind changes 180 degrees. The Muslim sails all go limp. The Holy League sails all fill up. And the Holy League captures or sinks 200 of the 230 Muslim ships. It breaks the back of the Muslim control of the Mediterranean. The Battle of Lepanto, October 7, 1571. Now, Spain could have gone around the Mediterranean and freed up every city from Muslim Ottoman control. But instead, they begin to bicker, and Spain decides it's going to take its army and navy and smash the Reformation in Holland and in England. So, the very next year, the Iron Duke of Alba goes from Spain and pillages Holland. It's called the Spanish Furies. And Antwerp, Holland, he kills everybody in town, leaves piles and piles of bodies. But in 1588, Spain sends its armada to smash the Reformation in England. Now, Charles V is dead, his son Philip II is in charge, and this invincible armada is headed toward England. And you have Queen Elizabeth gives the most famous speech of her career. She said, I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the stomach of a king, and of a king of England too, and I stand against any monarch of Europe that would dare invade the borders of my realm. And with God's help, we'll have a great victory. And so she stirs Sir Francis Drake and all the different guys, and they fight off. And then a hurricane comes up. And it smashes the Spanish armada, blows them through the English Channel up by Scotland, and then just smashes it to pieces on the coast of Ireland. Why is that important? Spain had a monopoly on the New World for 100 years. After Columbus, the first settlement in America, North America, was 1565. A bunch of Protestants from France called Huguenots settled Fort Caroline, Florida. Today that's Jacksonville. Well, Spain found out about it and killed all of the men and took the women and children away. And then they settled St. Augustine, Florida. So when they say, well, St. Augustine, Florida, that's the oldest European settlement in North America. It's like, yeah, that's because they killed all the Protestants in Fort Caroline. But why is this important? Because it broke Spain's monopoly on the New World. So all the other countries of Europe said, this is our chance, let's settle a colony. And it was like an Oklahoma land rush. You got France settling New France, which became Canada. The Dutch settling New Amsterdam, which became New York. Swedes settling New Sweden, which became Delaware and New Jersey. And the English settled Virginia, named after the Virgin Queen Elizabeth, and New England. Here's Adam Smith, wrote in Wealth of Nations, Spaniards claimed all America as their own, but the defeat of their invincible armada put it out of their power to obstruct any longer the settlements of other European nations. In the course of the 17th century, English, French, Dutch, Danes, and Swedes attempted to make some settlement in the New World. So are you still with me? So, had the Spanish Armada won, there would have been no Anglicans in England, and no Puritans or Pilgrims, and no New England, and no United States. North America would have been an extension of New Spain or Mexico. So here we have Virginia. It's settled, and it's an Anglican colony. There's only one denomination allowed in Virginia, the Anglicans. Here's the first charter of Virginia. In propagating of Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the knowledge and true worship of God. And so, one of the second ships coming to Jamestown got shipwrecked on Bermuda. They pieced together the wreck, and then they sailed to Jamestown. One of the guys, named John Rolfe, when he was in Bermuda, he discovered sweet tobacco, brought it back, and they planted it in Jamestown. And they figured the Indians smoked tobacco leaves, peace pipes, you know, and the Indians are really healthy. And so they thought tobacco was healthy. And so in England, there were doctors prescribing tobacco. I think you need to take, can you imagine that? And so this was the cash crop for Virginia. Everybody's growing tobacco. And so I'm reading through all these laws of Virginia, and I found this one, 1624, Virginia Assembly. Whosoever shall absent himself from divine service any Sunday without an allowable excuse shall forfeit a pound of tobacco. We missed you at church on Sunday, tobacco. And who could come to Virginia? Well, this is what they said. There shall be a uniformity in our church as near as may be to the canons in England, the Church of England. We shall be loath that any person should be permitted to pass that we suspect to affect the superstitions of the Church of Rome. Right, Catholic. And so do you know when the first Catholic church in Virginia was? 1795. This is after the Declaration, after the Constitution, after the Bill of Rights. Why? Because it was an Anglican colony from 1606 to 1786. Now, sometimes you'd have lax governors and they would let in Presbyterians and Baptists and so forth, but then you'd get a tough governor that would want to tighten the screws. And so, in order to go to Virginia, the second charter says, none be permitted to pass in any voyage into the said country, but such as shall first take the oath of supremacy. What's that? Well, oath of supremacy. I declare that the King's Highness is the only supreme governor of this realm in all spiritual and ecclesiastical things. You had to acknowledge the king was the head of the church in order to be a subject in good standing with the king, and to be able to even come to the colony. And not to take this oath was considered treason. So, you know, you can read through the histories of England, and so the Pilgrim separatists couldn't take that oath. And they got persecuted. They finally fled to Holland. And then Spain attacked Holland. Matter of fact, it was an 8-year war of independence for Holland to break free from Spanish control. And then the Pilgrims fled to America. And they leave Holland, they go to England and pick up a boat, but then it leaks a couple times and they have to switch it out for the Mayflower. They come across 102 of them, confined to a 4-foot high space for 66 days. It's not a cruise ship. I mean, there's no privacy. I mean, it's tossing and it's, you know, it's really tough. So they finally get across, and they find out they're 500 miles off course. And you think, okay, no problem, just sail down the coast to Jamestown. Well, it's stormy, it's winter, and off the coast of Cape Cod is this area where the sand goes out and it's really shallow for like miles. And you think, well, I'm a couple miles away, and all of a sudden your boat gets stuck, and in a storm, the waves smash it, and it gets splintered to pieces. So the Pilgrims almost sink. It's actually called the graveyard of ships. 3,000 ships have sunk off of Cape Cod. And so the Pilgrims almost sink. The captain goes back to Plymouth Rock and says, too dangerous to do any more sailing, everybody off the boat. And of course the Pilgrims are like, who's going to be in charge? We were going to go to Jamestown, submit to the king's government, the whole world is ruled by kings, And they do something unique. They give themselves the authority to start a government. So the Mayflower Compact says, having undertaken for ye glory of God and advancement of ye Christian faith, a voyage to plant ye first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, we, in ye presence of God, covenant ourselves together into a civil body politic, to enact just and equal laws as shall be thought most meet or necessary, unto which we promise all due submission. Simple, revolutionary. It's us coming up with the idea of forming a civil body politic, and we're going to pass our own laws and we're going to submit to them. This was a polarity change in world government. Instead of top-down rule by these kings, it's bottom-up. In the womb of this little Mayflower is this polarity change, this little DNA change, where the people rule themselves. Now, where did they get their idea? It's the difference between a dead pyramid and a living tree, where every root and every little capillary root sucks in nutrients to help make this thing alive. Every citizen participates. Every member of the body has to participate. Well, the people that founded New England, these pilgrims, where did they get their idea? From their pastor, John Robinson. He was a separatist pastor. He was not a king-appointed Anglican pastor. He's considered one of the founders of the Congregationalist Church. Again, this church model where every citizen has a responsibility to know God and love God and be accountable to God, and all the citizens, the pastor teaches them what the Word says so they can know God, and then they all fast and pray and vote. This painting hangs in our U.S. Capitol Rotunda. The word Mayflower Compact, the word compact means covenant. The word commonwealth means covenant. This was studied by the reformers, and John Robinson, the pastor for the Pilgrims, says that the Pilgrims are knit together as a body in covenant of the Lord, so we hold ourselves tied to care for each other's good. Covenant came from ancient Israel. It's this idea that it's people in agreement with each other, getting rights from God, accountable to God. Right? You want to be nice to everybody because you're accountable to God, and He's everywhere watching. Now, it's interesting, the next century, the word covenant got changed to social contract. The Age of Enlightenment. And so it's a people in agreement with each other, with or without God. If He's there, fine. If He's not there, fine. It's not really that important. And you get your rights from the group, and you get accountable to the group, to what you agree on. Well, that sounds okay until the next century comes along, and you have the French Revolution and Marxism, which is a social contract without God, intentionally without God. And so if your rights come from the group, and you're accountable to the group, and there's no God that exists, the group becomes God. The state becomes God, and whoever is the political party boss that finds his way to weasel into the power, he's the dictator. And so your life is only of worth if you can contribute to the group. And if the group decides that you're taking more than you're giving, you're old, and you're costing too much money to keep you alive, guess what? You get pushed off the cliff. Right? Now, so you can see this transition from covenant to social contract with a God to social contract without a God, and then it turns back into a dictatorship. So the Pilgrims had this idea of a covenant where they got from ancient Israel, and they settled in Massachusetts. And the Pilgrims, there's just a couple hundred of them, and they are doing a good job. And after 10 years, those Puritans back in England that are getting their noses cut in half and branded on the face as a heretic, they decide that Pilgrims can make it in the New World, so can we. So beginning in 1630, it's called the Great Puritan Migration. 16,000 Puritans leave England and fill up Massachusetts. A couple hundred Pilgrims, thousands of Puritans. Now, in England, the Puritans did not like the king telling them how to have church. But once they got to America, they thought, well, maybe it's not such a bad thing that the government tell the church how to have church because we're in charge of the government. So they began to institute Puritan religious uniformity. Not Anglican or Calvin, no, it's Puritan. And if you didn't believe the way the Puritans did, you persecuted and you would flee. So Justice Black in Ingalls versus Vitale, 1962, said, when some of the very groups which had most strenuously opposed the established Church of England found themselves sufficiently in control of colonial governments, they passed laws making their own religion the official religion of their respective colonies. And so non-conforming pastors and separatist pastors, they have to flee again. And so Reverend John Lothrop and his church flee and found Barnstable, Massachusetts. Reverend Roger Williams and his church flee and found Providence, Rhode Island, and the First Baptist Church in America. Reverend John Wheelwright and his church flee and found Exeter, New Hampshire, and Reverend Thomas Hooker and his church flee and found Hartford, Connecticut. This is unique on planet Earth. At this time, you have the 5,000 years of Chinese emperors, Indian Maharajas, Muslim sultans, African chieftains, King Kamehameha is in Hawaii, kings of Spain, France, and Austria. The whole world's ruled by kings. And here you have this little greenhouse called New England, where you have pastors and their churches forming communities and deciding the laws for those communities. So each colony was founded by a different Christian denomination. Virginia was Anglican. Massachusetts was Puritan. Connecticut and New Hampshire were Congregationalist. Rhode Island was founded by Baptists. And these original New England colonies can form a confederation, and they say the united colonies of New England enter into a league of friendship for preserving and propagating the gospel and for their own mutual safety and welfare. New York was a Dutch Reformed colony, and you had to be Dutch Reformed. Here's what they wrote, 1624. They shall within their territory practice no other form of divine worship than that of the Reformed religion, Dutch Reformed, and thus by their Christian life draw the Indians to the knowledge of God and His Word. And then New Amsterdam was taken over by the British, turned into New York. But here you have the British controlling the colony that's filled full of Dutch people. I mean, they can't even speak the language, and so what do? They go, okay, Anglican is the official denomination. You can sort of do your own stuff just as long as you pay taxes to us. That became a little buffer zone. So other immigrants that would come over, and Jews would come over, they'd say, okay, as long as you're paying taxes to support the Anglican denomination, you can sort of do your own stuff, and we're not going to be too concerned about it. Delaware and New Jersey were originally New Sweden, and they were Lutheran, until they were taken over by the Dutch and taken over by the English. Maryland was originally a Catholic colony. Lord Baltimore was given it all, and then Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn, a Quaker. And his dad was a famous admiral for the British that defeated the Dutch and captured Jamaica from the Spanish. And Admiral William Penn takes his boat and he goes over to Amsterdam and he puts King Charles II on it because his dad had gotten his head chopped off, Oliver Cromwell, in the English Civil War, and they had a Commonwealth for 15 years, but it sort of didn't function right, and so a bunch of people want to bring the king back, and so since King Charles I had his head chopped off, William Penn Sr. goes over to Amsterdam, puts King Charles II on it, brings him back to England, and so he's dying, and his son converted and became a Quaker. And he gets put in prison, and the dad has to fish him out. Gets put in prison again, the dad fishes him out. The son, William Penn Jr., is like, I don't need your help anymore. And, the dad still fishes him out. Finally, the dad's starting to die, and he realizes that when he's gone, nobody's going to be there to fish the son out of prison. So he imposes on King Charles II. He says, here I was an admiral for the British, I captured Jamaica, I helped bring you, and the king's like, okay, I'll take care of it for you. So the dad dies, the young William Penn, the Quaker, he goes in and wants to use his inheritance to buy some land in West Jersey in the New World to bring some Quakers over. King Charles II counters and says, you know what, I'm not just going to give you West Jersey, I'm going to give you 45,000 square miles and make you the largest non-royalty landowner in the world. And he gives it all to this young William Penn. Now, William Penn Jr., he could have been really rich, but instead he decides to do a holy experiment. He opened up his colony to let all the persecuted Christians of Europe come in. What was his experiment? To see if Christians of different denominations could live together in the same geographic area. Wow, what a novel idea. You see, these other colonies, for the most part, they said, if you don't like our denomination, fine, start your own colony. right? And so the Virginia Anglicans would chase out the Quakers and chase out the Puritans and chase out the Lutherans, right? And the Puritans would chase out everybody else. And so here in Pennsylvania, it was like, no, no, no. We're going to see if Christians of different denominations can live together in the same geographic area. And so it works. And so it was in Philadelphia that the Continental Congress met. And that they wrote the Declaration, and they wrote the Constitution. And it was the first capital of the United States. Why? Because all the other colonies felt comfortable coming there. North Carolina was originally an Anglican colony. South Carolina decides to break away, and it's just plain Protestant. Georgia is plain Protestant. And so we got these non-conforming pastors fleeing the Puritans, and they're founding these new communities. And we're going to look at Thomas Hooker for a second. He's a pastor, and he founds Hartford, Connecticut. And his church members come to him and say, Pastor, it's nice to be here in Hartford. How do we do the government thing? And so he gives a sermon in 1638 titled, The Foundation of Authority is Laid in the Free Consent of the People. And it becomes the Constitution for Connecticut. From 1639 up until 1818, Connecticut uses Pastor Thomas Hooker's sermon as their constitution, which I bring out in my book and DVD, Who is the King of America? In other words, instead of separation of church and state, it's the pastor and the church that created the state. How could you say, Pastor, don't get involved in politics, when it's the pastor's sermon that's their constitution in Connecticut? How can you say church members don't get involved in politics when all there was in Hartford were his church members? Anyway, so here's a plaque in England. Thomas Hooker, founder of the state of Connecticut, father of American democracy. Wow. Here's another plaque in Hartford. It says, Thomas Hooker's congregation established the form of government upon which the present Constitution of the United States is modeled. Well, I thought the founders got all their ideas from the Enlightenment. Okay, this is like a century before the Enlightenment. This is separatist pastors fleeing Puritan uniformity, founding a community, and the people come to him and say, how do we do the government? And he gives a sermon. And this church model of the citizens are involved. It's a congregational church in ruling their, not just their church, but their little community. So there's Hartford, Connecticut. So Roger Williams, he flees Puritan uniformity, and he founds Providence, Rhode Island. And he writes a famous letter that's quoted. So this is a plaque in Rhode Island. It says, Roger Williams, apostle of soul, liberty, founder of Rhode Island, and so forth. Below this spot stood the rock on which Roger Williams landed in exile for the devotion to freedom of conscience. Devotion to freedom of conscience. Some more statues of Roger Williams in Hartford. And here's something that he wrote. I having made covenant of peaceful neighbors with all the sachems or Indian chiefs and natives round about us, and having in a sense of God's merciful providence unto me in my distress, call the place Providence, a shelter for persons distressed of conscience. Here's another plaque, and it talks about a shelter for persons distressed of conscience. Another plaque, on this spot, the water's edge, the rock, according to tradition, Roger Williams landed in exile for his devotion to freedom of conscience. So when Thomas Jefferson writes his letter, that I'll get to in a minute, Jefferson puts the phrase in there, adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience. And so he founds the first Baptist church in America, and oldest Baptist church in America, right? And Roger Williams goes on, says, persecution for the cause of conscience is most contrary to the doctrines of Christ Jesus, the Prince of Peace. God requires not a uniformity of religion to be enacted and enforced in any civil state. Enforced uniformity is the greatest occasion of civil war, ravishing of conscience, persecution of Christ Jesus in his servants. So, he's chased out of Puritan Massachusetts. For 14 weeks, he's traveling through the woods, makes friends with the Indians, founds this place called Providence, and he writes. He actually gets on a boat and goes back to England and gets a charter for his colony. He gets the charter during that 15-year period that is the English Commonwealth. So it's one of the few charters that doesn't have the king mentioned in it. And anyway, so while he's in England, he gets it published, Bloody Tenets of Persecution for Conscience Sake. The word tenet means the practice. So this bloody practice of persecuting people for their conscience. Why is this an important letter? Because this is the one Thomas Jefferson refers to. Let me go through it. In it, he says, Jews under the Old Testament and Christians under the New Testament were both separate from the world. And when they have opened a gap in the hedge or wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world, God has ever broken down the wall itself, removed the candlestick, and made his garden a wilderness as it is this day. What's he talking about? Remember, when the people sin, God will let the government come in to begin to dictate to the church, like what we experienced in Europe, and remove the candlestick. That refers to the book of Revelation, where it says, repent and do the first works, or else I will come unto thee quickly and remove that candlestick. He continues, and that therefore if he will ever please to restore his garden and paradise again, it must of necessity be walled in peculiarly unto himself from the world, and that all that shall be saved out of the world are to be transplanted out of the wilderness of the world and added unto his church, our garden. A separation of the holy from unholy, penitent from impenitent, godly from ungodly. So that is the letter where the wall of separation came from, right? So when all the Supreme Court, they're quoting wall of separation, where did it come from? It comes from this letter right here. So it's important for us to understand the Baptist concept that he was referring to. He was referring to Isaiah chapter 5. My well-beloved is a vineyard, and he fenced it, and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. For the vineyard is the house of Israel. He looked for judgment and found oppression. So the wall was to keep the world out of the church. The wall was to keep the king's agents from coming into the church and arresting you and bringing you before the Star Chamber and cutting off your ears. The wall was to keep the government out so the church can be free to worship God. But when the church sins, God says, okay, the Deuteronomy 28 thing, if you sin, I'm going to let the enemy come in and oppress you. And so that was the breaking down of the hedge. And anyway, so the concept behind this, in Europe, kings burned dissenters at the stake for not believing the way they did. Muslim sultans killed people for not believing the way they did. Nebuchadnezzar tried to burn Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for not believing the way he did. Kings want to tell people how to believe. But these dissenting pastors in New England saw in the Bible that Jesus never forced anyone to believe in him. Here he is, the Son of God himself on earth, and he never forced anyone to believe in him. Matter of fact, if you read the one passage, he multiplies loaves and fishes. He has a crowd following him for a free lunch. And he says, you're following me because of the bread. And then he says something that you know, that he knows that it's going to be difficult for them to understand. But it's almost like he says it on purpose to shake away those that are following him for the free lunch for the wrong reason. He says, well, you want the bread? I'm the bread of life. Unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no part in me. And they're like, whoa, this is a difficult saying. And many of them walked with him no more. And to push it even a little further, Jesus turns to Peter and says, you want to go too? Peter says, where else can I go? You're the only one with the words of eternal life. In other words, I don't understand what you said, but I'm sticking with you, whether I can understand it or not. Jesus says, okay, we got rid of those that were following from now. The only ones we have left are the ones that are sticking with me and having faith and so forth. But you contrast that to some other religious leaders in history that said, well, get back here or I'll chop your head off. You know, he didn't run after them and say, you guys misunderstood what I was saying. No, he knew that. Anyway. So if Jesus never forced anyone to believe in him, we can't. And so these New England pastors, this developed into the concept of rights of conscience. That you don't force people on fear of death and beheading to believe. And it goes even deeper. It's the concept that God is love. And the more you love someone, the more you want that someone to love you back. And so God loves us infinitely, he has an infinite desire for us to love him back. God loves you infinitely. He has an infinite desire for you to love him back. Now, God does not need your love. He's not incomplete in any way. Any more than parents don't need to have kids, but they sort of want to have kids. And they want to pour their love into the kid. And they don't expect the kid to pay them back, but they would like a little thanks, a little attention, a little kiss on the cheek to the dad from his daughter, a little playing ball with the son, right? So God doesn't need our love, but he wants it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So, he loves us with a jealous love, the way a groom loves a bride. He was like, God loves us, God loves us. Yeah, he loves us like a groom loves a bride. I don't know about you, but most grooms are jealous if their bride is spending more time with another man, or texting another man, or talking to another man, or whatever, you know? So here, God loves us with the love of a groom to a bride. He's got a jealous love, and when we're spending more time thinking about something other than him, and spending our days, and he's just sort of an afterthought, he gets jealous. I tell people God has plan A and plan B. Plan A is he blesses us so much we turn to him out of gratefulness. If that doesn't work, there's plan B. He withholds the blessings and we turn to him out of desperation. His goal is to have us turn to him, but he can't force us. So that's the thing about love. Love, by definition, has to be voluntary. The moment God would force us to love him, it evaporates. If he wanted to make us obey him, he could have made us obey him, right? He has the stars, and they stay in the orbit. He has the electrons going around the protons and neutrons, everything. The little doggy licks your hand and is really cute because God programmed its little brain to lick your hand and be really cute. The plant the apple seed grows into an apple tree because he programmed the seed to do that. He makes things with laws, and he makes everything obey these laws. Just with man, he gives us the choice as to whether or not we're going to obey him. We have the choice, which means he has to give the choice not to obey him, for the choice to obey him, to be the choice. So he wants us to love him, but he can't. It's like if a husband twists his wife's arm, and if a husband twists his wife's arm and says, "Tell me you love me," no matter what she says, she doesn't love him. But if he woos her and courts her and provides for her, and defends her and protects her and rescues her and takes her out for dinner and gives her chocolate and flowers and gives her a good time, and out of the abundance of her heart it sort of bubbles up, "I love you," then it means something. That's what God's after, right? And so the founders in America understood this, that your worship of God is only of value to God if it's freely given, if it's your conscience that you give it. Not that you're forced by the government and you're in fear that you're going to get your arm chopped off or something. William Penn said this, "Force makes hypocrites. 'Tis persuasion only that makes converts." God's interested in you understanding him and you making a voluntary decision that you're going to love him and not the force. So, after the revolution, are you still with me? After the revolution, different states began to loosen up, and Connecticut allowed Baptists into the state. Now, Connecticut, like Virginia and other states, they had established a particular denomination. Connecticut was established Congregationalists from 1639 to 1818. So in Connecticut, the government collected everyone's tithes and the government paid the pastors. Sounds strange? That's still the way they do it today in Germany. You get a job in Germany, you fill out your little W-9, whatever the form is, you check which church you go to. The government withholds the tithe from your paycheck, and the government pays the pastors. Sounds nice, except the younger generation has decided that all they have to do is not check the church box and they get a 10% raise. And so you have all these young people identifying as atheists. And you got all these big cathedrals that are empty. And they're selling them to the Muslims and so forth. So in Connecticut, the government collected the tithes. And so they decide, okay, we're going to let Baptists in, but just go down and register as a dissenter or a nonconformist. The government will collect your tithe and will funnel it to the Baptist pastors. Sounds okay, except congregational church membership began to decline. And so they made it a little bit harder to opt out. And they make them jump through hoops and then make it embarrassing and so forth. And so that's the setting where the Baptist says, why do we even have to go down to register anyway? We should have equal rights like everybody else. And so that's when they write the letter to Thomas Jefferson. Now, Jefferson was instrumental in disestablishing the Anglican Church in Virginia. Did you know George Washington, Patrick Henry, and many others wanted to keep the Anglican Church established, just change the name to Episcopal, get rid of the king, but still have the structure there? And the Baptist says, why should we have to pay to support a church we don't go to? And so Thomas Jefferson was their hero because he disestablished the Anglican Church in Virginia. And so they're writing a letter to Jefferson, who's now president, saying, man, we wish that you could help disestablish the Congregational Church in Connecticut as well as the rest of them. So here is the letter that Danbury Baptist wrote to Thomas Jefferson. Why is this important? Because this is the letter that Jefferson answers, and in his answer he mentions that phrase from Roger Williams, wall of separation. Sir, our sentiments are uniformly on the side of religious liberty, that religion is at all times and places a matter between God and individuals, that no man ought to suffer in name, person, or effects on account of his religious opinions, that the legitimate power of civil government extends no further than to punish a man who works ill to his neighbor. But, sir, our ancient charter, and they're in Connecticut, so he's talking about the 1639 one, together with the laws made coincident, are that what religious privileges we enjoy as Baptists, we enjoy as favors granted and not as inalienable rights. Sir, we are sensible that the President of the United States is not the national legislator, and also sensible that the national government cannot destroy the laws of each state. Sort of wish they would get back to that. But our hopes are strong that the sentiments of our beloved president, which have had such a genial effect already in Virginia, like the radiant beams of the sun, will shine and prevail through all these states and all the world till religious hierarchy, that's that pyramid structure, right, and tyranny be destroyed from the earth. And so in other words, Baptist hopes Jefferson's sentiments, which disestablished the Anglican Church in Virginia, might help disestablish the Congregational Church in Connecticut. And they ended the letter by saying, sir, we have reason to believe that America's God has raised you up to fill the chair of state. May God strengthen you for the arduous task which providence and the voice of the people have called you. And may the Lord preserve you safe from every evil and bring you at last to his heavenly kingdom through Jesus Christ, our glorious mediator. Right? They're witnessing to him in this letter. So after Washington gets in, all the denominations send Washington a congratulations letter. He writes back. When John Adams gets elected, all the denomination heads send him letters, and he writes back. And so now Thomas Jefferson is the president, all the denominations send, he writes back. And so this is the Baptists sending a letter, and Jefferson writes back. He says what? Gentlemen, believing with you. And so he goes on and lists three things that he's basically quoting back to them out of their letter. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God. That he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of the government reach to actions only, not to opinions. I contemplate with solemn reverence the act of the whole American people which declare that their legislatures shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. That is Jefferson's reference to Roger Williams, the founder of the First Baptist Church in America, who wrote his bloody tenet of persecution that says that we don't want the government to come in and dictate to us. We want a wall to keep the government out. And here he is saying the same thing to the Baptists in Connecticut. Adhering to the expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore man to all his natural rights. And then he says, I reciprocate your kind prayers for the protection and blessing of the common Father and Creator of man. I just think it's interesting. The very letter where Jefferson mentions wall of separation between church and state, he mentions the Creator. You know, I read this case where the federal judge did not allow the teaching of creationism in the public school because he wanted to maintain the wall of separation between church and state. Yet Jefferson himself believed in a creator, even mentioned in the Declaration, all men are endowed by their creator. These liberal judges are brilliant. They're able to use Jefferson's words out of context to prohibit what Jefferson believed. Imagine that. They're able to take Jefferson's words to outlaw what Jefferson believed. Here in the same letter, Jefferson mentions wall of separations, he mentions creator, but they're saying to maintain separation, we have to get rid of the creator. It's like, these guys are brilliant. And so who did Jefferson think was limited by this wall? Did he think it was the pastors that couldn't kneel at the 50-yard line and say a prayer? Did he think it was the librarians with a little cross necklace? Did he think that it was, the kids wanting to say grace? Or who did Jefferson think was limited by his wall? Well, he explains, I consider the government of office holders in the states to be Protestants. There's only 1% Catholic at the time of the Revolution. There were 3 million people, only 30,000 Catholics. Catholics were only allowed in 3 states, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York. Did you know there was only 0.1% Jewish in America at the time of the Revolutionary War? 3 million people is less than 3,000. There were only 7 synagogues in the whole country. So it was a predominantly Protestant Christian country, but it was 100% Judeo-Christian. Now, let's look at some of these 9. So these were the states that sent delegates that approved the U.S. Constitution and that approved the Bill of Rights. And so to be even a delegate sent there, you had to be elected. And so this is what New Jersey, 1776 Constitution. All persons professing a belief in the faith of any Protestant sect who shall demean themselves peacefully shall be capable of being elected. Georgia, 1777, representatives shall be chosen out of the residents in each county, and they shall be of the Protestant religion. South Carolina, the Christian Protestant religion shall be deemed the established religion of this state. Well, I thought First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. You missed the first word, Congress. The federal Congress could not establish it. Why? Because the states had established denominations. And it says right there, South Carolina, the Christian Protestant religion shall be deemed the established religion of the state. It's established. Massachusetts Constitution, written by John Adams. The legislature shall authorize the support and maintenance of public Protestant teachers of piety, religion, and morality. This was the beginning of the public school system. The state paying Protestant teachers. New Hampshire, 1784 Constitution. No person shall be capable of being elected who is not of the Protestant religion. That was in effect up until 1877. Matter of fact, New Hampshire's Constitution had this line, all as morality, piety, rightly grounded on evangelical principles will give the best and greatest security to government. The state is to make adequate provision for public Protestant teachers of piety, religion, and morality. Did you know that word evangelical principles was in New Hampshire's Constitution up until 1968, when they changed it to high principles? Connecticut retained its original 1662 colonial constitution, which was based on Thomas Hooker's sermon, and it talks about Christianity. Rhode Island kept its 1663 colonial constitution up until 1843. And it said, full liberty and religious concernments, rightly grounded on gospel principles, give the greatest security in the true Christian faith and worship of God. Now, I mentioned 9 of the states required you to be a Protestant. 3 were liberal. Delaware, its state constitution said, I profess faith in God the Father, Jesus Christ, his only Son, and in the Holy Ghost, one God bless forevermore. All office holders had to say that. And you said that was liberal? Yeah, because you could be any denomination of Protestant and even Catholic and say that. Another liberal state is Pennsylvania. Ben Franklin signed this constitution. Each member shall subscribe. I do believe in one God, creator and governor of the universe, and acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. You say that's liberal? Yeah, because you could be any denomination of Protestant and even Catholic and say, yeah, I believe in the divine inspiration of the Bible. Ben Franklin signed that. I went past this one. Virginia's Constitution says it is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity towards each other. Did you know that that line is still in Virginia's state constitution? It's not Islamic forbearance or Buddhist or Hindu, it's Christian. So, like Europe, where it was one denomination per country, originally Christian denominations denominations did not get along. They tar and feather each other, chase each other out of each other's colonies. Their attitude was, if you don't like our denomination, fine, start your own colony. But then they all had to work together during the Revolutionary War. After the Revolution, their attitude changed to, we may not always agree on religion, but you were willing to fight and die for my freedom. I need to let you practice your faith. So they began to tolerate each other, but on a state level. So different states could expand their tolerance at their own speeds. So, like a racetrack with 13 lanes, you had 13 states, and some of them were expanding it really fast, and some of them were doing it slow, but it was up to the states to decide. Sort of like, let's look at a couple examples. North Carolina, their 1776 Constitution said, no person who shall deny the being of God or the truth of the Protestant religion shall be capable of holding office. So that word Protestant in 1835 was changed to Christian. See? Everything's the same. No person who denies being of the truth of the Christian religion. Why is that? That allowed Catholics to hold office, because there was an Irish potato famine, the millions of Irish Catholics came to America. And then in 1868, North Carolina changed to the following persons shall be disqualified for office first, any person who shall deny the being of Almighty God. So prior to 1868, you had to be a Christian to hold office in North Carolina. After that, all you had to do was believe in God. And this is still in North Carolina's state constitution. Beneficent provision for the poor is one of the first duties of a civilized and Christian state. That little archaic remnant is still in there. Another state that we can see the transition, Maryland. Its 1776 Constitution says no other test required than an oath to the state and a declaration of belief in that Christian religion. Well, there's the persecution of Jews in Bavaria, and 250,000 Jews come across, and so Maryland adds in 1851, top part's the same, and it adds, and if the party shall profess to be a Jew, the declaration shall be of his belief in a future state of rewards and punishments. So as of 1851, you could hold office in the state of Maryland if you were a Christian or a Jew. New York's Constitution was pretty liberal. It said free exercise and enjoyment of religious profession and worship without discrimination, provided that the liberty of conscience shall not be so construed as to excuse acts of licentiousness. What's licentiousness? Sexual immoral, lack of sexual restraints, promiscuous, carnal, against natural order. So you could have freedom of conscience, but they can't use it to do sexually immoral things. Do you know what? Today, it's switched completely around to now they say that you have to embrace licentiousness and believe in all that. There's no restraint sexually in order to be able to hold office. How do you like that?
That's New York, right?
So, religion was under state's jurisdiction. You have federal government, state government, right? Federal government does only what the states couldn't. Regulate interstate commerce, provide for the national defense, have a navy, build a wall, right? That's just the federal government's job. All laws governing personal behavior are under state's jurisdiction. So, Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story said the whole power over the subject of religion is left exclusively to state governments to be acted on according to their own sense of justice and the state constitutions. So, like today, some states legalized marijuana and others not. Some states allow underage drinking and others not. Some states have smoking bans and others not. Some states have gambling, others not. Some states have prostitution, Nevada. Thank God the rest don't. Well, back then, some states gave a little more religious freedom, and other states had blue laws where everything was closed on Sunday. But it was up to the people in the states to decide. And so you drop a pebble in the pond, the ripples go up. First there was tolerance just for the denomination that started the colony or the state. Then it went out to all Protestants, and then after an Irish potato famine, millions of Irish Catholics come across, so they get tolerated. And then it goes out to liberal Christians, new denominations starting, then it goes out to Jews, then it goes out to monotheists, then it goes out to atheists, then it goes out to the LGBT Muslims, and the last one's in when it kicked the first ones out. So, think of you're in your house, you're looking out your window, and you see maybe a street person there, and you have compassion, and you bring them into your house, feed them dinner, let them sleep on the couch. You go to bed, you wake up, and there's two street people in there. The guy let in his friend, and they're going through the kitchen, but you're like late for work. You're like, well, I don't want to push out, I'll just go to work. You come home, there's a half a dozen of them in there. And they're rummaging through everything, and you're like, oh, okay, and you gotta go to bed. You wake up, and there's like 2 dozen in there. And they're just helping themselves to everything and sitting on the couches and everything. Well, you're late for work again, you go to work, you come back, and your house is packed. And you're like squeezing in the door, and they start saying to themselves, who's this guy? We haven't recognized him, what's he doing? And they shove you out of the house, and you're looking back at your house thinking, what just happened? So here you have in America, you had the Puritans inside, and then they open up, and then they let in some of the other Protestants, and then the Protestants look at each other, they let in the Catholics, and then the Catholics, and the Protestants all of a sudden let in the Jews, and they're letting in more and more and more. So finally, in comes the atheists, and the LGBT, and the Islams, and they're wanting to push the Christians out the door. So, now why did Christians open the door in the first place? 1, Jesus never forced anybody, so we shouldn't. 2 is doing to others as you would have them doing to you. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Most of them came from Europe where they're persecuted. They don't want to be persecuted, so they're not going to persecute. 3rd one is evangelism. I thought this was the most interesting. So prior to the Second Great Awakening revival and the missionary movement, could you present your faith to someone of another country? Do you know when the first missionary was sent out from America to another country? It was Adoniram Judson, Baptist, who went to Rangoon in Burma. The year was 1812. Prior to 1812, if you wanted to preach your faith to someone that was not a Christian, how are you even going to see them unless you let them into the country? And let them into your neighborhood, and you love on them, and you do neighborhood evangelism. And so these were Christian arguments to a predominantly Christian country to let in non-Christians. So Christians convinced themselves to let in non-Christians. Why? Because Jesus said doing to others, and Jesus never forced anybody, and we've got to evangelize, and we've got to let them in. So America was not founded by atheists who wanted to try to figure out how to tolerate non-atheists. It was not founded by LGBT or Muslims who want to figure out how to tolerate non-LGBT and non-Muslims. No, America was founded by Christians of different denominations that did not get along. They had to learn how to work together, specifically during the Revolutionary War. After the Revolution, they began to tolerate each other. First Protestants and Catholics and Jews and monotheists, and then finally went out, and now the last ones in want to kick the first ones out. Anyway, I started coming and give you a little encouragement tonight, and now there's a whole lot more to my presentation, but I'm looking at the clock, and I'm wondering if I should wrap it up. So,
I don't know, Mike.
how am I doing time-wise? Is this the right time to quit?
It's about time. If people want to start asking questions, I think.
And I want you to get a chance to look at the book table before you leave anyway. So.
But you want to do your ending that you did last night? That was so good that you did.
Is it okay with you? Can I go through it a little bit more? All right. Anyway, John K. Wilson said in his book, Religion Under the State Constitutions, an establishment of religion in terms of direct taxing to churches was the situation in 9 of the 13 colonies on the eve of the American Revolution. James Meacham, Congressman, 1854, at the adoption of the Constitution, we believe every state, certainly 10 of the 13, provided as regularly for the support of the church as for the support of the government. One, Virginia had a system of tithes, right? The government's collecting everybody's money, paying pastors. Down to the Revolution, every colony did sustain religion in some form. It was deemed peculiarly proper that the religion of liberty should be upheld by a free people. Had the people, during the Revolution, had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. So, the Bill of Rights were meant to be handcuffs on the federal government. Says the state, this is the preamble of the Bill of Rights, the states at the time of adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. So they wanted to make sure that the federal government did not abuse its power, so they wanted to restrict it. So the First Amendment, as well as the first 10 amendments, were handcuffs on the federal government. And anyway, here's Justice Stewart wrote in Abington Shep, the First Amendment was adopted solely as a limitation on the newly created national government. The Establishment Clause was primarily an attempt to ensure that Congress would not only be powerless to establish a national church, but would also be unable to interfere with existing state establishments. And so the three things that changed, it was the Irish potato famine, millions of Irish Catholics come to America, and laws got on the books that were anti-Catholic, but they called them anti-sectarian. And the next is the 14th Amendment, and then the theory of evolution. So you have the Irish immigrants come over, you get these anti-sectarian laws on the books. And the 14th Amendment, what's that? Lincoln Republican freed the slaves. Democrats in the Deep South passed Jim Crow laws, black codes, started the KKK. And so a guy named John Bingham was a congressman from Ohio. He pushes through the 14th Amendment to force the southern states to give rights to the freed slaves. During the debates, someone says, well, this is different than the first 10, because the first 10 amendments are handcuffs on the federal government. This 14th Amendment is the federal government basically taking the handcuffs off its wrist and putting it on the states, telling them what they have to do. John Bingham said, I repel the suggestion that the amendment will take away from any state any right that belongs to it. Well, guess what? It happened anyway, and that's because of evolution. So Darwin's theory of evolution comes out in the middle 1800s. Species can evolve. That influences Herbert Spencer. He's the one who coined the phrase survival of the fittest. He wants to apply evolution to everything he can think of, including law. So he influences Christopher Columbus Langdale, who's the head of Harvard. So the Harvard Law School invents evolutionary law. It's called the case precedent theory of law. Reading the Founding Fathers, you just forget them. You just take the most recent case and you just bend it a little bit at a time. And it's the only law school in the country that teaches evolutionary law. A graduate from the Harvard Law School is Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., and he's on the Supreme Court now. And his biographer says, Holmes shook the little world of lawyers who saw that the law was given by God himself, immutable and eternal. Holmes changed the law to a constantly evolving thing, a response to the continually developing social environment. And so he's the one that started to say, okay, the Supreme Court, we're going to just forget what the founders said. We're just going to, And so now you have two types of justices on the Supreme Court. One wants to generally stick with the meaning of the founders, and the other are these evolutionary ones that are just pushing an agenda, right? And so we begin to see all kinds of cases of the federal government usurping power from the states, and but then there's this main case. It's some Catholics were getting bus rides to Catholic schools. And remember those anti-sectarian laws passed when the Irish potato famine was going on? Some state says, no, we don't want to have the state pay for Catholic bus rides for kids to go to their Catholic schools. And so this case is called Everson versus Board of Education, and it's appealed to the Supreme Court. And so this justice is Hugo Black. He gives his decision in 1947, establishment of religion clause in the First Amendment means at least this, neither a state nor the federal government can set up a church. If he would have said the federal government cannot set up a church, I'd agree with him. He adds, neither a state. He just ignored all that stuff that I just went through reading all those state constitutions. And did you know his biographer writes, this is Professor Daniel Dreisbach, he says, Hugo Black's biographer reported that the justice did not peruse the proceedings of the First Amendment, First Congress, which debated the First Amendment, until after Everson was decided. Hugo Black had never been a judge before in his life. He was a Democrat senator from Alabama, put on the Supreme Court by FDR. Here he is deciding this Everson case, and his biographer says he never even read the debates in the first Congress that debated the First Amendment until after he gave his decision. But since he gave it, now it's the law. And Joseph Story, Supreme Court Justice, 1833, says the real object of the First Amendment was not to countenance, much less advance, Mohammedanism or Judaism or infidelity by prostrating Christianity, but to exclude all rivalry among the Christian sects. It was to keep an equal playing field. It was to be an umpire, so, right? But now we have it pushing others. So 10 years after that, you have the Washington Ethical Society, wants to be a tax-exempt society as a religious corporation, but the state said, no, you're ethical, and then the Supreme Court said, no, ethical culture is a religion. It says the Congress should use a broad definition of religion, which includes ethical. And then in 1961, a guy wants to be a notary in Maryland. Remember I read those Maryland constitutions? But it ends with, so help me God. This notary doesn't want to say, so help me God, because he's an atheist. So the state says no, goes to the Supreme Court. Hugo Black does another decision, He says, among the religions in this country which do not teach what would generally be considered a belief in the existence of God are Buddhism, Taoism, ethical culture, secular humanism, and others. And then Scalia said, we did indeed refer to secular humanism as a religion. So now ethical culture and secular humanism are religions. And to not prefer one or the other, they kick God out, right? And then there's a draft dodger during the Vietnam War. He wants to be a religious conscientious objector as an atheist. And the Supreme Court says the test of religious belief is whether it is a sincere and meaningful belief, occupying in the life of its possessor a place parallel to that filled by the God of those admittedly qualified for the exemption. So now all you have to have is a sincere and meaningful belief, and you're religious. Another draft dodger, 1970, Elliot Welsh, he wants to be a religious conscientious objector as an atheist. Army says, no, you're going. The Supreme Court says, no, you didn't have to go. Conscientious objection to war is religious if this opposition stems from beliefs about what is right and wrong, and these beliefs are held with the strength of traditional religious convictions. So all you got to do is really believe your atheist stuff, and you're religious. And then in 2005, there was a prisoner in the Wisconsin prison system who wanted to have a non-Bible study Bible study. And he also wanted male pornography, they wouldn't give it to him. And the state said, you only get a room for religious purposes. And so he didn't get the room, so he sues, and it goes to the federal judge. And the federal judge says atheism is indeed a form of religion. The court has adopted a broad definition of religion that includes non-theistic and atheistic beliefs. Atheism is Kaufman's religion, even though it expressly rejects a belief in the supreme being. So now atheism is a religion. And to not prefer one religion over the other, the government kicks God out. But by kicking God out, they are establishing the religion of atheism. So did you catch that? So you got Christians tolerating each other, and then they tolerate the atheists, and then they have these court cases. So now, since atheism is a religion, they kick God out, which means they're violating the First Amendment, because the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. By kicking God out, they're establishing atheism, which they have identified as a religion. I love this. So when the atheists are real pompous and they say, we just need to get rid of all religions. It's like, okay, let's start with yours. So what's the federal government supposed to do when a religious case comes before it? It's supposed to throw up its hands and say, we have no jurisdiction. Let it be taken care of on the state level. Amen. That's what the federal government's supposed to do. Ronald Reagan said, in the last 2 decades, we've experienced an onslaught of such twisted logic that if Alice were visiting America, she might think she never left Wonderland. We're told that it somehow violates the rights of others to permit students in school who desire to pray to do so. Clearly, this infringes on the freedom of those who choose to pray. To prevent those who believe in God from expressing their faith is an outrage. Reagan goes on, the Constitution was never meant to prevent people from praying. Its declared purpose was to protect their freedom to pray. So the Supreme Court has declared war on Christianity. Now, the LGBT agenda is, in a sense, a creative way to cut ties with Judeo-Christian beliefs and declare war on Christianity. And so if they come in and they say, remember when they were passing it? They said, we want to do our own stuff in our bedroom, and the government shouldn't tell us what we want to do in our bedroom. And we're like, okay, you can do whatever you want in your bedroom. As soon as it's passed, they make a beeline to the preschool. And they begin demanding that these little kids be taught that if there is a God, he's so messed up, he's put in men and women's bodies, and you have to have operations to fix it. What a messed up God. And if that behavior is not a sin, arguably there are no sins. If there's no sins, you don't need a Savior. And so they're undermining traditional Judeo beliefs under the name of tolerance. And so the irony is, Jesus himself, right, said in the beginning, God created male and female, and the man shall leave his father and mother, cleave his wife, and the two shall become one. So Jesus himself, and so they have a strategy. Their tactic is to guilt trip Christians into being more Christian than Christ. If you're really Christian, you will tolerate this transgender, the LGBTQ agenda being taught to the little kids. If you're really Christian, you'll tolerate that. Well, wait a second. Would Jesus teach that? No, Jesus taught that God created male and female, And so in other words, they're saying if you're really Christian, you'll allow stuff to be taught that Jesus wouldn't teach. Or if you're really Christian, you won't act like Christ. If you're really Christian, you won't act like Christ. You'll allow stuff to be taught that Jesus would never allow to be taught. Jesus says, if you cause one of these little ones that believes in me to stumble, it's better that a millstone be put around your neck and you be thrown in the depths of the sea. And we, the people, are the king. 70% of the people in America identify themselves as Christian. And we're allowing this. We're asking for a millstone to be put around our necks and us to be thrown in the depths of the sea. So, anyway. So we see that under the guise of being tolerant, the politicians, oh, well, I want everybody to love us, I want to be really tolerant, I'm going to allow this in. They're really declaring war on Christian values. It's a veiled way to declare war on Christianity. And so they begin to discriminate against Christians in public schools, boycott and sue them, call hateful names and so forth. And what do we have to look forward to? Well, Europe. It's sort of advanced as far as this direction. Europe went from a Judeo-Christian Europe with Catholic cathedrals, Protestant Reformation, and Jewish neighborhoods to a secular Europe with the French Revolution. Robespierre, Napoleon spreading all this French secularism around, and then it's free sex, anything goes, LGBT. And now it's turning into an Islamic Europe, with Muhammad being the #1 name for newborns in London, Milan, and Brussels. Now it's interesting that the LGBT agenda can't see this. Do you know sin blinds you to the effects of sin? Got a businessman, he's got a pretty secretary, he thinks he's fooling around. He doesn't think that he'll lose his marriage, alienate his kids, end up losing his business, be shamed and die alone in a hotel room somewhere. He doesn't see that. He just sees immediate pleasure. The LGBT agenda is a lust-driven agenda. All they see is we want our immediate sexual fulfillment. We don't really, we're unable to see that once we push this, it's going to pull down the moral fabric of the country. And what is going to take its place? Well, let's look at Europe. It's Islam. And so we've gone from Bibles in the schools to condoms in the schools. Now it's hijabs in the schools. And so we have, this is a school in Boulder, Colorado, Rocky Mountain High, Fort Collins, Colorado. The students are saying the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under Allah. And here is another school where they're teaching the kids how to say the Muslim conversion prayer, the Shahada. And they give the girls free scarves. And this is a middle school in Tennessee, a public middle school. And the kids are all learning how to pray to Allah. Look at the teachers, oh, isn't that so cute? They're all praying. And there's another school. There's the imam shows up, and he's teaching all the kids. They got to bow the right way, get on the rugs. There's another school. This is happening in our public schools in America. Why? Because wealthy Muslims have bought large ownership interests in the textbook companies.
Yes.
Like Pearson, there's some wealthy billionaire from Libya that's bought a big, huge chunk of this billion-dollar company. And so they're rewriting all the textbooks. I talked to a father in Orlando. His son got a text on his phone, looks over and he sees, it says, you forgot to turn in your prayer rug assignment. The dad said, what's that? Oh, we have to make a Muslim prayer rug and practicing the Muslim conversion prayer, the Shahada. And the dad goes to the school and says, well, can they learn John 3:16? Oh, no, separation of church and state. But they can learn Islam? Oh, it's cultural. One of the kids that went through that course went to college. He had converted to Islam. He murdered his roommate for insulting Islam. And so the dad gets a hold of the notes, and it's got a paragraph on Jews, got a couple paragraphs on Christianity that end by saying Jesus was considered a troublemaker and executed, and like 5 pages on how wonderful Islam is. And here we had a country that was founded by Christians tolerating each other. The Christians convinced themselves to let others in, others in, others in, others in, and now you got this going on, and they're indoctrinating the kids. And so I was, a little illustration, I was loading software on a brand new computer, went to church, they were having a baby dedication, and the pastor was telling the parents to raise the child in God's Word. I thought to myself, he's telling them to load God's software on that brand new computer. So if you think of it, we're a spirit, mind, and body. Your mind is like a super fancy computer. It's more than that, but it's at least that. Your body's like the computer case. which makes it silly for people to argue over what color the computer case is. Reds are better than greens. It's like, it doesn't matter what color the case is, it's what software is running on it. So the battle is who gets to load the software on the next generation's brains. And the Bible is, in a sense, a behavioral software program. It teaches you how to behave, forgive those and turn the other cheek. And the Bible is ultimately the way to realize that Jesus died on the cross to pay for all your sins so you can go to heaven. But it teaches us how to interact with people. It's a behavioral software. Islam is a behavioral software program. But in a sense, the way it teaches, you can beat your wives, marry 6-year-olds, female genital mutilation, I mean, all kind of stuff. It's sort of like a corrupted file. It's sort of like a virus or malware that gets on there. I mean, think of it. If you had an animal that starts killing species of its own kind, we would think it's got something wrong. Maybe hypochondria. That's what Winston Churchill called it because he fought in the Nile River Wars in Egypt. And we think, well, that thing it's got something wrong with it. You know, if a bird was going and cracking open its own eggs and killing its own unborn, we'd say something's wrong with that bird, right? So the battle is who gets to load the software on the next generation's brains. And anyway, there's a lot more to it. Now, Christianity has been the fastest growing religion in the world by voluntary choice. A lot of its growth is through fear and intimidation, but around 80,000 people are added to Christianity every day. But it's mostly in Africa, the Middle East, India, and Asia. Did you know Christianity is the most persecuted religion in the world? 9 out of 10 countries where it's persecuted are Islamic countries, the 10th is North Korea. And about 500 people are martyred every day, and mostly it's in Africa, the Middle East, India, and Asia. So where the persecution is the greatest is where the revival is the greatest. We have to remind ourselves, you know, someday you're going to be dead. It's a nice way to end the talk. But you're going to be in heaven because you believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross to pay for all your sins. Right? God is a just God, so he has to judge every sin, even the smallest ones. If he doesn't judge the sin, he's giving consent to it. You know the old weddings? Speak now or forever hold your peace. If you're holding your peace, you are giving consent to the wedding. If there's sins and God doesn't judge them, he is, by his silence, giving consent to it. So he's not going to give consent to sin, so he has to judge every sin. He can put off the judgment, but he has to judge it. Because he's a just God. But in that sense, Jesus had the judgment poured upon himself on the cross. He took the judgment for everything that everybody would ever do on the cross. So God is just in that he judges every sin, but he's love in that he provided a lamb to take the judgment. And so if you've ever been like in a cornfield and the hailstorm is coming, you can stand there and get hailed upon, or you can run in the barn. The hail comes, but it hits the roof of the barn. You can hear it, ting, 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 ting. Jesus is our barn. The judgment of God is poured forth on sin, but Jesus took the judgment for our sin, and we're in him. The person that's not in Jesus is like, okay, dude, God has to judge every sin you've ever done, otherwise he's an unjust God, and he's not an unjust God, so he's going to judge your sin. You can stand there and take it, or you can run in Jesus, and he took the judgment for you. Anyway, so, good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. We have to remind ourselves the church was born into a one-world anti-Christian government, the Roman Empire. And for the first 3 centuries of the Christian experience, it was being persecuted by the government. And what happened? It grew and exploded and grew. And so God is not afraid of persecution. So someday you're going to be dead, you're going to be in heaven because you believe Jesus died on the cross to pay for your sins. And when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, with no less days to sing his praise than when we just begun. Imagine you've been in heaven 10,000 years. That'd be pretty cool. You know, you're walking the streets of gold, maybe you meet Moses. Maybe Moses will invite you over to his place. Jesus said, my Father's house are many mansions. I don't know what it's like, but I bet Moses will have a pretty nice place. He'll probably have one of those big fireplaces where the logs don't burn up. Get in the burning bush in the wilderness, didn't burn up, and the logs in his fireplace. Anyway, yeah. I heard one preacher say, in heaven you'll travel as fast as you think, and I'll probably show up late. My wife will say, where were you? I said, I was thinking about something else. But maybe we're all there in Moses' big living room, like tonight. And maybe Moses is sitting like right in front of you. And after all the small talk's over, you say, Moses, tell us the story. I mean, what was it like? I read the book, I even saw the movie, but here you are in person. Moses will stand up, the room will get quiet, and it says, Pharaoh, the most powerful military leader in the world, was charging in at us with these chariots and these razor-sharp swords, and we were totally unarmed, and I just stood there, and I held up my staff, and I said, God, use me to deliver your people. The waves came in and swallowed up Pharaoh's chariots. We were like, wow. Then we're going to look around the room, and there's David. David, tell us your story. And David will stand up and say, I was just a teenager, and his son Goliath was giant, but he was mocking our God and making fun of our faith, and these grown-ups were too chicken. And I said, well, enough of that. I went out there with my little sling and hit him in the head and took his own sword and chopped his head off. And there'll be Gideon and Deborah and all the great saints of old. It'll be really exciting. And then everybody in the room is going to look at you. Say, you tell us your story. We haven't heard from you yet. Tell us, what did you do when it was your turn to be on earth? What were they saying about God in your country? Or the baby that the Lord knew in the mother's womb, like Jeremiah, or the Ten Commandments, or marriage that God himself instituted in Genesis. What did you do when the whole world was against you? Tell us. And they're all sitting on the edge of their seats. Oh, well, tell us how you had courage in the face of all kinds of evil. What are you going to say? I'd hate for any of us to be up there and Jesus to walk in and have a big screen and show all kinds of miracles and people coming to the Lord and everything, and him saying, this is what I had planned for you to do. But you just didn't have enough faith. Then you're looking like, oh man. And then you realize you can't go back to earth and do anything else for Jesus because you're already in heaven because you believe that Jesus died on the cross to pay for your sins. But guess what? We're still on this earth. We still have breath in our lungs. We still have feet that trod the soil. We still can do those things that we'll be known for forever. You're not saved by the works that you do. Jesus did it all on the cross. Amen. But we can still do things for him and help spread the gospel and have courage and faith. That he that overcometh, I'll give to eat of the tree of life. Right? He wants us to stand up for him. This is an exciting time to be alive. Out of those 6,000 years of world history, which really isn't that long, the good Lord decided for you to be alive right now. He could have had you be born during the bubonic plague or Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan. He could have had you be born during all those times. And you know what? He knows exactly what's going on in the world. And he's given you his word. He's given you his spirit. He's given you a tremendous church with great pastors like Steve Branson and the other pastors that are standing up. And he's given you a Christian family. I was thinking of a basketball game. And the coach has you on the bench and says, okay, it's time for you to get in the game. And you're like, but coach, haven't you noticed? They're playing really rough out there. Look, somebody just got knocked down. And the coach says, yeah, I know. Okay, it's your turn. Now get in the game. But coach, look, they're playing really rough. Yeah, you're 7 feet tall. They are 4 feet tall. Get in the game. Greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. God chose for you to be alive right now because he thinks that you're the answer to what the problems of the world are. Thank you so much. God bless you.
We're going to take questions and answer. First thing, Roger did remind me to have everybody remember October 22nd to November 2nd is early voting. So please remember to do some early voting. Recognize religion, and they are free to practice their religion under the First Amendment. Their religion says it's okay for me to kill a non-Muslim. How do we get around that?
Sure. And thank you, by the way, those of you that feel led to help me out. It's greatly appreciated. Muhammad is the key to understanding it all. And if you put his life under a microscope, you see it goes through 3 stages. Muhammad was a religious leader for 12 years in the pagan city of Mecca. He only makes 70 converts. He gets confrontational. They chase him out of town. Muhammad has nowhere to go. He is a Muslim refugee. So he goes north to a Jewish city called Medina. The Jews let Muhammad in as a Muslim immigrant. Muhammad goes into the minority neighborhoods of Medina and he finds people who have grievances against the Jewish government, and he organizes them into a following. We're familiar with the term of organizing in the community. When the following gets big enough, he and his followers go to the Jews and pressures them to accommodate him and his followers politically. They do, they make a treaty. Now Muhammad's a political leader in addition to being a religious leader. Then Muhammad's followers in Mecca get confrontational and argumentative and threatening. They get chased out of town for disturbing the peace. They have nowhere to go. They are Muslim refugees. They go to Medina, and the Jews are nice and let them in as Muslim immigrants. And Muhammad allows his followers to rob the caravans headed to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing them out of town. So where Jesus said, if they take your coat, give them your shirt, his attitude was, if they take your house, you retaliate, take their caravan. And so Muhammad got a whole chapter of the Quran on how to distribute booty from robbing caravans. It's called Surah 8, Chapter 8. The title of the chapter is Spoils of War. Muhammad gets a fifth of the booty. He has 300 warriors, they rob caravans. Even one verse is Surah 33:50 that says, Allah has given you the slave girls as your booty. So he said his followers can have 4 wives plus as many extra women as their right hand possesses. They just don't have the status of the wife. They're slave wives and concubines. So Muhammad had anywhere from 11 to 22 wives. Youngest wife Aisha was 6 years old, consummated at 9. And so the Meccans send their soldiers to escort their caravan, 1,000 of them. Muhammad with 300 warriors defeats 1,000. The Battle of Badr in 624 AD. This amazing victory, having been outnumbered 3-1, convinces Muhammad to be a military leader. And he fights in 66 battles and raids in the next 8 years before he dies. He even uses the catapult when he attacked the city called Al-Taif, hurling these rocks into the city. And when they told Muhammad that the catapult hurling these rocks is killing innocent women and children, Muhammad's response was, they are among them. So they got to be killed too. So within 5 years of Muhammad coming as an immigrant into the Jewish city of Medina, there's not a Jew left in the city of Medina. They were chased out, killed, or enslaved. Within the next 50 years, the rightly guided caliphs conquer Yemen, which used to be Jewish, conquer Jerusalem, which had been Christian, conquer Syria, which had been Christian, conquer Egypt, which had been Christian, conquer North Africa, which had been Christian, and finally cross the Strait of Gibraltar, conquer Spain, and they're stopped outside of Paris. And so the first century of Islam is a military campaign. Right. And so they want to look to that as their example, Muhammad and the rightly guided caliphs, just like we looked at Jesus and the apostles and the early church as our example. So there is freedom for all religions in America. But Islam is not just a religion, because Muhammad was not just a religious leader. He was a political and a military leader. And so those that want to follow him religiously, politically, and militarily. And so a mosque is a religious building, a political building, and a military building. Bowing to Mecca is a religious bowing, a political bowing, and a military pledging of allegiance to another capital. And our effort to split the religious side of Muhammad away from the political and military side, we're trying to split Muhammad. Who are we to split their prophet? He was all three, a religious leader, a political leader, and a military leader. And so when you invite in Islam, you're inviting in a religious system, a political system, and a military. So yes, there's freedom for all religions in America, but is there freedom for all political systems and all military systems? No. And so they say, well, Islam, Sharia law is compatible with the Constitution. Okay, let's look at it. In America, you punish the rapist. In Sharia, you punish the woman who has been raped. So if a woman is raped, it's her fault for allowing herself to be used as a tool of Satan to tempt the man. And she gets whipped 100 times. And so the women have to wear the burqas to look unattractive on purpose. Women are not allowed to leave their house without a male relative. If they are, they're accused of rape. If they're raped, they get whipped 100 times or, in many cases, stoned to death. You tell me, is that compatible with our Constitution? No. We punish the perpetrator of the crime, they punish the victim of the crime. We have an 8th Amendment that says there shall be no cruel and unusual punishment. Sharia law says to cut off the hand of a thief. That would be considered cruel and unusual, right? We have a First Amendment, right? Where you're free to join a religion, you're free to leave a religion. Islam, you're free to join, but you can't leave. It's the death penalty to leave. It's called RIDA, R-I-D-D-A. So, when they say there's freedom for all religions in America, yes, but Islam is not just a religion. It's a political system and a military system. As a political military system, it has certain dynamics to it that are very similar to gang dynamics. You join the gang, you're loyal to the gang, you participate in the booty. You leave the gang targets you and kills you. Right? So do we allow any other system or gang to take over a neighborhood and say, okay, the Bloods and the Crips, they get their neighborhood. They treat women a certain way. I mean, think of it. If all the Bloods and Crips, if they just waved the little flag and says, we're a religion now. Oh, you're a religion. Okay, I guess you can go ahead and take over the neighborhood. You can practice your pimps and prostitutes, and you can do your laws there, and we'll just stay away. Would that make any sense? What if Hitler would have simply called Nazism a religion? Oh, it's a religion. Well, I guess we can teach it in our schools now. And have the kids, read the Mein Kampf and teach the Jews are untermenschen, under mankind. Right? We faced this in the 1800s with the Mormons. They wanted to say that they could have 19 wives and it's part of their religion. And our government says, look, there's freedom of religion, but we're not going to allow you to have a harem full of women and say it's part of your religion. No sexual immorality under the name of religion. So we faced it before, and you can't say, well, you get to, like they do in Detroit, where I've talked to people that live there, where a Muslim man will have a number of wives and put them all in different apartments and houses. And the wives will go down to the welfare office and say the husband's not around, and they get these checks. Right. The man visits the wives, and the more kids they have, the larger the checks get. He's living like a king at state expense, and all the kids playing in the middle of the street are his kids. And I could tell you story after story. So there's freedom for all religions in America, but Islam is not just a religion, because Muhammad was not just a religious leader. And so we need to pressure the politicians that says, if you're allowing that mosque to be built, you must be in favor of what's going on there. So you must be in favor of beating women, polygamy, pedophilia with little girls, female genital mutilation. Oh, I'm not in favor of that. Well, you allowed it in. You're going to allow the Bloods and the Crips to come in and do their stuff. And if you're allowing it, you must be in favor of it. So I'm going to tell every person I know that Congressman so-and-so, that Mayor so-and-so is in favor of wife beating, polygamy, pedophilia, chauvinism. And I'm going to tell all my friends that you're in favor of this. And then watch the politicians squirm. Because politicians want to be loved. They want people to say nice things about them. Right? So, it's the hard reality, but all you have to do is look at Europe and you can see where this is headed. And so there is an urgency to wake people up.
Yes.
Now, I use the computer analogy. I can love my computer, but not love some of the software on it. Right? If it's a malware or some virus, right? We love the Muslim person. We do not love the software program called Sharia. Right? We love the person, but we don't like the teachings of Sharia. Anyway. Oh, okay.
And then we have another question.
Yeah, question.
And if we're running late, I can take questions at the book table. So I'm going to hang around all night, so we won't.
All night?
Not all night, but until everyone else leaves, and I'll be the last one to leave. So.
I think this is pretty short. Do you and David Barton ever reference each other?
Yeah, David's great. I speak probably half a dozen times a year at events with him. One time we actually led a tour of the Capitol together. Somebody that was there on the tour, they go, it was like, what do they call it? Battling historians. David would say, now this over here is this. And I would say, well, yeah.
Oh, wow.
No, but David and I are good friends. And so also his son, Tim, who's
Yes.
brilliant. And I pray for God to bring in reinforcements because I just turned 61. And so we need young people to get a hold of this. And Tim Barton is brilliant. I'm really excited about him. So thank you.
One question.
Yes, Roger.
You definitely are a national treasure.
Amen.
I know Wonder Woman called you, and you
I heard someone say a big shot's just a little shot away from home. So when I get home, my wife reminds me that I'm not. But that's very nice of you to say that. So.
Well, I don't know what to ask you, but I want to ask you something. So, you know how yesterday Moscow split from the Christian Orthodox just yesterday, and I think it only happened in the last millennia, if I'm correct on that. And then the Saudi Arabia going on thing with Turkey, maybe that'll affect the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. And you have so much knowledge from patterns of repetition, right? So what do you think we're heading? It's just speculation or whatever you know. So where are we heading?
Good question. I have 2 or 3 presentations that goes into all that in depth. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire fell. The Muslim world wanted to moderate itself, and you had secular leaders in Turkey, like Ataturk, and he outlawed the Arabic language, moved the weekend from Friday to Saturday and Sunday, first one to educate women, got rid of the fezzes and the burqas, and he made it a secular country. You had the Shah in Iran, who Eisenhower approved the CIA's first plan called Operation Ajax to overthrow a nation's leader. So we overthrew Mossadegh and we installed the Shah. So the Shah loved America. He was our friend. And so you had Ataturk in Turkey, and the Shah in Iran, and Gamal Nasser in Egypt wanted to be secular. Look at pictures of Cairo in the 1960s and 70s. It looks like Southern California and the Beach Boys, you know. You had in Syria in the 1960s, they had beauty pageants. You know, women dressing up. They were moving in a westerly direction until 2 things. The Wahhabis team up with the Saud family. They conquer Arabia, and now Muslims on their Hajj, their pilgrimage, go to Mecca, and they get infected with this violent Wahhabi version of Islam. Wahhabism has spurned off all of the groups: ISIS, Taliban, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram. They come from the Wahhabi theology. But the big deal was 1938, Standard Oil Company discovered oil in Saudi Arabia, and it went from the poorest Muslim country to the richest Muslim country, became a magnet for fundamentalism. The rest of the world said, why should we be more secular? Let's be more fundamental like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia used its money to buy Western politicians and to support these fundamentalist Wahhabi-affiliated groups. And anyway, so that's the trend. That Saudi Arabia would be a friend of us on one side, but they'd be funneling money to all the terrorists on the other. I mean, there's articles that said the same Saudis that were giving money to Hillary Clinton were funding ISIS. Yeah. Now, the current guy, I haven't totally figured him out because he is taking a more of a liberal progressive stand in Arabia, you know, and I do think that it could be because the Shiites in Iran that Obama gave billions of dollars to so they could get their nuclear weapons going, they're becoming such a big threat that the Saudis realize that maybe they need to work together with Israel and America to be able to stand against the Shiites. So it's an interesting dynamic. I don't have all the answers to it. I do know Saudi Arabia has been wanting to run a pipeline across Syria to Turkey to Europe. Russia has not wanted that because Russia's #1 export is oil and gas to Europe, so we got a little competition there. I know that doesn't do adequate answers. I do see that historically there's been this push to have power concentrate into the hands of the dictators and pharaohs, but only on a global scale. And I think Trump has been a monkey wrench in their plans and wanting to give power back to the people. But it's a struggle. And I see the biblical analogy of Manasseh. So Israel split, north kingdom south, north is taken away to Assyria, 10 northern tribes gone. Now you've got Judah in the south. And Hezekiah's got a son, Manasseh, who's wicked. And he's burning his own kids to Moloch, the pagan god. He's filling the streets of Jerusalem with sacrificing his kids to Moloch. The prophets come to Manasseh and says, you are doing the same thing that the countries that were here before Israel came in did. And because they were doing this, I brought you in to drive them out. And because you're sacrificing these kids to Moloch, I'm going to drive you out. It's just sort of Planned Parenthood, right? I mean, and Manasseh has a grandson named Josiah. 8 years old, he becomes king. 16 years old, starts to seek the Lord. He's around 20. He noticed that his granddad trashed the temple. And so he and out the temple, in one of the storage rooms, they find this old dusty scroll. Josephus said it was the last copy of the law on earth. Moses' original one with burlap and sort of buried under a bunch of junk. The priests had never read it before. They read it, they go, this is pretty serious, and so they bring it to Josiah. He had never read it before. It's the law of God, the blessings and the cursings. And when it gets into the curses, Josiah's like, we are in trouble. And he rips his garments and repents. Sends to a prophetess in town named Huldah, the wife of the king's tailor. And she's a woman who has a reputation of hearing from God. And so the messengers say, what's going to happen? And Huldah says, yes, judgment will come on this nation because of its sins of killing these unborn, these little kids. But it's not going to come during Josiah's lifetime because he repented when he heard the words of the Lord. And so for the rest of Josiah's 31-year reign, he has the Levites going out and teaching the law. He's tearing down Sodomite temples. He's just having a revival going on. He has this big, huge Passover, right? And so this revival goes on for the rest of his 31-year reign. Now, when he dies, Zedekiah and bad, and then Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes them all away. So I feel like we deserve judgment. A just God has to judge, and there's nothing more that gets to him than an innocent, and what could be more innocent than a little baby? So Cain's killed Abel. Abel's blood cried out to God for judgment. These babies' blood is crying out for judgment. God's a just God. He's got to judge it. But if we repent, he puts the judgment off. And so I believe that we're experiencing a period of the judgment being put off. And how long is it going to go? I think that the Lord is looking at us to decide how long it's going to go. That's why it's so hard to pin down when the end times is going to take place, because maybe God's given himself a little room to switch things around if we repent. I don't know. I'm not a scholar when it comes to prophecy, but I do feel like there's this trend of power wanting to concentrate. Google is working with China with a Dragonfly program to be able to track every single citizen and have a loyalty index. And they're going to use every piece of your purchasing, the millions of cameras that identify your face to see where you're going. And there was some journalist that was not allowed to get on an airplane because he had a 40% loyalty index. Remember that girl fan that was in the X-Men movies? And she disappeared for a while, and then she comes out and she apologizes. Why? Because she had a 0 loyalty index. Wow. She had, had to avoid and speak anything about the politics. So now she's come out and said, oh, the state is so wonderful. And then they want to do these background checks, not just on the 1 billion Chinese, but on all the countries and companies doing business with China. And then they wanted to eventually have it go global. And so you can see technology without a Christian conscience, you're back to the mark of the beast. You're back to Augustus Caesar wanting to have a global census. I mean, here, Augustus Caesar wanted to have an NSA and track everybody. Right? And that caused Mary and Joseph to have to leave Nazareth and go to Bethlehem to be counted. But it fulfilled prophecy with Jesus being born in Bethlehem. So the devil's working his plan, but not realizing that God's got a bigger plan underneath of it all that's working. What's God's plan? God's plan is plan A. He blesses us, we turn to him. If that doesn't work, there's plan B. He withholds the blessings, we turn to him out of desperation. And then we are underneath the blood of Jesus, so we're not judged. And then everybody that refuses to be under Jesus, God's a just God, he has to judge them, and that's what the book of Revelation is all about. Anyway, you can talk to Pastor, and he'll clean up all my theology messes.
One last question,
Yes.
and then we'll close it out for the evening. Next.
Well, you talked about how Islam is a three-pronged
RPM, religious, political, military.
Right. But this country has been electing socialists, humanists, secular humanists, and I think those people are as three-pronged as Islam is. And I think they work together until, they're going to work together until it doesn't profit one or the other, and then we'll see who comes out on top if Christians don't get their act together.
Yeah, I agree with you. We used to think of communism over here, Islam over here. The Muslim Brotherhood is a hybrid. And And you can actually trace it. It took place in Iran. So Iran had the Shah, who's friends of us. The communists were wanting to take over Iran, and the fundamentalist Ayatollah was wanting to take over Iran. And Jimmy Carter pulls the rug out of the Shah. And so the people in Iran, it was sort of this mixing that took place, where you have fundamentalist Islamic ideology motivation using communist tactics of creating crises and so forth, agitating and so forth. And so, yes, there's no honor among thieves. And they'll use each other thinking that, sort of like those old movies where the bank robbers will rob a bank and they're around the table dividing up the money 3 ways, and then the one pulls out a gun and shoots one of the guys, and they're shocked, and he's like, well, we'll just divide up the money 2 ways. And then he pulls out the gun and shoots the other guy, and the guy gets to keep it all, right? They'll use each other, and so the left thinks they're bringing Islam in to help their party, not realizing that Islam has its own agenda. And once they gain the upper hand, they'll push the homosexual off the roof of a building. But the LGBT agenda is incapable of seeing the future, right? Because it's like an algorithm where you take all this data and your mind can sort of predict what's going to happen. But sin is an incapacitating of that algorithm. And so if you do it, you see an act and you see this temptation, this predictive algorithm says, if I do this, it's going to turn to this, and that's not good. I'll go to hell, and I don't want to. I'm going to have my life. So I'm predictive, but sin disables that, and so you see this immediate pleasure, and you're unable to see all the bad repercussions that's going to take place. So the LGBT agenda, in a sense, has this predictive algorithm disabled. All they see is the immediate pleasure. They're incapable of seeing that it's going to tear down the fiber of the country, and then it's going to be like Europe, and these fundamentalist Muslims are going to come in, and they're going to end up building a power base. They're going to want to get more and more involved in government, and then they're going to start having their no-go zones, and then they're going to want to kill the homosexuals and so forth. Anyway. And people say, well, homosexuals and Muslims don't get along. Well, that's sort of the big picture. The little picture is in Islam, the homosexual is the man on the receiving end. So the guy doing it thinks of himself as super macho. And so the sultans would have lots of wives, and they would have little boys called coquettes, as they, and I won't get into it all, but you can read about it. So, thought I'd come and give you a little encouragement tonight, lift you up.